Well, hello, hello, hello. We are back again. And I'll tell you what, this time has just flown. I couldn't believe on Saturday how fast the day went. And today is the same way, which is how I know I have the most amazing guest list ever. And welcome back to everybody who's joining in the live. Again, this is the One Heart, One Earth November Awakening event for 2020. And it's all about healing across the globe and holding the highest vibration possible this week. So if you are not yet on our site and connected to our collaborative effort, you can go to oneheartoneearth.net. And don't forget to click subscribe here. We would love it if you did that. And I am really excited about our next. I'm excited about the whole entire event, but we have with us Esha Estar. Is that how you're pronouncing it, Estar?
Yes, Estar, Esha Estar.
All right. I love that name, by the way.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. And you have such a powerful story. You have such a great, just so much to offer. So why don't you start by just sharing who you are with everyone?
Yeah, well, first, thank you so much, Lisa, for giving me the opportunity to utilize your platform to share the story and also to share what is birthing through, not just for me, but for everyone that's been on your show. We're feel like we've been in this sort of gestation period that we've all been holding some seeds inside of us that we're now, we can take a deep exhale and give birth and push out whatever it is that we've been pregnant with. Yeah, so for me, Esha Estar, I want to actually start there because it's a brand new name for me. And Esha is actually a Hindu name and it means desire. And I just looked up Estar just over the weekend, and Estar means to be. And so you put those two names together, desire to be. And I'm like, could there be anything more perfect than that, right?
Yes, that's beautiful. Oh, it gives me
Yes.
goosebumps too. It's got this like, not to like throw a psychic reading in the middle of this, but when you say it, like I feel like this purple crown chakra goddess Lakshmi. I don't know. It's just really
cool. And it's so interesting that you say goddess because it's actually that name is connected to the goddess Parvati, which was Shakti's, Shiva's consort, Parvati. Wow. So yeah, so I chose that name actually last year, the beginning of last year, and I wasn't quite ready to step into it yet because for my whole life I've gone as Amanda Brutus Phillips. That's how most people know me. And but I had this event that happened in my life 3 years ago, and the event actually was the loss of my husband. So in 2017, August 2017, my husband died suddenly, completely unexpected. I had just come back from a trip from Thailand. I'd been gone for about 3 weeks, and I was actually in Thailand taking a course on death and dying. And it was a fabulous course, and I had been moving more and more into that direction of doing workshops on death and dying and grief, and just trying to raise the awareness of these topics that are like the elephants in the room. No one wants to talk about them, but yet it is where we are moving into each and every day. And so I come back, come home, and my husband and my daughters are in the Caribbean visiting his relatives. And the day that, this may be one day after I returned home from Thailand, they're at the airport and they're on their way to come home. And it's August 1st. I remember the day very clearly. Don't forget any of those details. But they're at the airport. I'm texting with him. It's about maybe 11:20 at night. And it's the first time I'd heard that he was experiencing pain in his leg, in his thigh. And he assumed that it was muscular, that, I've been a massage therapist for 15 years. He's like, yeah, when you come home, you'll work it out for me. When I come home, you'll work it out for me. And I'm like, okay. I didn't think anything of it. And so we wrap up our conversation, and I told him that I loved him and couldn't wait to see him. And about 20 minutes later, my daughter, who at the time was 16, she calls me completely frantic, and she said, something is wrong with Dad. And to make a long story short, what ended up happening is that apparently he tried to stand up but fell back, and he died of a pulmonary embolism. So he had a blood clot in his leg, and he wasn't aware of it. And so that whole experience of his death took me on this wild ride over the last 3 years, and everything that I have gone through, that whole experience, has brought me to where I am right now. The whole grief experience, giving myself permission with the grief experience, developing actually post-traumatic stress due to the sudden shock of it. But allowing myself to be in that state of grief and to journey with it has been one of the most powerful experiences that I've had in my life so far.
It's such a moving story, and I just can't imagine what you went through. And one of the questions that comes to mind for me is like, what were some of the steps you took to pull out of it? Because I'm sure it was darkness at first. So how did you turn that into light? Like, what happened for you?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, because it was such a dark night of the soul for me. I mean, I'm not new to loss, right? Like, I've had so many experiences in my life with loss. I lost my dad when I was 10 years old, when we first moved to this country. I lost my mom 2 years before my husband died. And of course we go through other losses. So grief wasn't new for me, but I think it's the manner in which he died, this suddenness of, it was the first time that I'd experienced, like, you're talking on the phone with someone and then minutes later they're gone.
Yeah.
And I think in that moment, it's like this time veil that we have, that we think it just completely dropped away from me. And in that moment, I realized that, I don't have time. We don't have time. We just have right now. And so, we have a lot of great wisdom teachers that talk about the present moment and talk about all we have is right now. And in that moment, I actually understood what they were talking about from an experiential place. But the darkness was very deep. I mean, I started having anxiety and panic attacks, and that was very new for me. And as a yoga teacher, I've always been this calm, cool, and collected person, right? So to be taken to the other side of the pendulum, where I'm experiencing this wobble, this uncertainty, was very difficult for me. And there were many moments where, pretty much it's taken me, this is the 3rd year. August 2nd made 3 years. And I'll say that it's taken me about a good 2.5 years to really be deep into the work to where I am right now. And so what I can say for any of your listeners or that are listening to this and they are experiencing grief, and we have this collective grief that we're actually all experiencing right now, right? There's so much death. And the funny thing is that there's always death, right? We live in a global world with billions of people, right? So there are millions of people dying all the time every year. But now it seems as if death is sort of center now for us to actually take a look at in a way that we've never taken a look at it before. And a huge part of what I had to do is to sit actually with death. And I was terrified to do that, but it seemed as if the energy of it wouldn't leave me. And, you can call it an existential crisis that, you finally come up to that place with your mortality. And you realize that, I don't have time. My life is just right now. And that's all I ever had. But I received in October, so 2 months after he died, I received one of the best advice that I've received, I think, probably in my entire life. And this woman, she told me, she's like, whatever you do, don't take any shortcuts in your healing.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
good. So
And
good.
isn't it so? It's fantastic. And for some reason that stuck with me, because she said, if you take any short, she's like, what's happening to you during this time will prepare you for who you're going to become. And, you know, of course, when you're in the midst and in the trials of grief, you're just in that place of complete suffering and darkness, right? You're not really thinking about the future necessarily. But somehow her message, the words that she said, stuck with me. And I realized that I have a choice. I could choose to self-medicate, and that's fine. For some people need that, right? Or I can choose to allow myself to feel. And I realized that the feeling part is so incredibly difficult. And I get it why we want to bypass sort of like these harsh, dark, difficult sensations of emotions of grief. But I decided that I didn't want to have to come back 10 years later to do this grief work, right? That I was going to go boldly into the night, so to speak, and feel it, and feel all of these very difficult, challenging, scary emotions, and that were surfacing. And the interesting thing is, at 10 years old, I didn't know how to grieve for my father when he died. And my husband's death actually ripped open all of those boxes that I had put on the shelf, right, inside of me. And one of those boxes was the death of my father that I'd never grieved before. And so I found that I was actually grieving two men at the same time, because my father also died very suddenly and unexpectedly. So it was very interesting.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Girl, you've been through it.
Well, you know, but I always say it's, you know, people will say, oh, you're so strong. And I'm like, I didn't do this by myself, right? It's by the grace of God as well. And so connecting with my feeling body was one. Making nature my friend. I mean, I would spend times just going for walks in parks. Even if it was 30 degrees outside, I would take a blanket, go sit near the lake, and I would just breathe. I would breathe. I would sometimes dance. And I didn't care who was looking at me. I just needed to have a way to express what I was feeling. Sometimes I would scream. A lot of times I would cry. I took art classes because I needed to shift, especially with the PTSD at that time. I needed to shift some of what was going on up here, the noise and the negative messages, into a different medium. Of course, lots of therapy and counseling. As a massage therapist myself, I knew body work was really important for me. And I think we forget that the body, that's where the feelings and the sensations and the emotions, that's where they go, right? And so your body, like my body became so alive with sensation, and it was so interesting. I'd never felt my body lit up in such a way, like a Christmas tree, right? And it scared and freaked me out for a long time. I'm like, oh my God, what am I feeling? And because I was in such a hypervigilant state already, I kept thinking, oh my God, am I going to die next? Right? But it's not that I was dying, but it was that my body was showing me the way. And it would pop up in different parts of my body. Like sometimes it would be in the chest, sometimes it'll be in the knee, other times it would be in my hip. So it did, the emotions did this ping pong in different parts of my body. But that's where I would also do the work. Why is my hip, what is this sensation related to, you know, in my waking life? And so there's so many things, I think, when we're in grief that we can do. I know the first thing that, you know, many of us want to do, we want to hide the density of the pain, right? Because it is painful. You lose the love of your life, and you don't want to live sometimes, right? You want to stay in your bed, you want to put the covers over your head, and you simply want to let go of the world. And these things aren't talked about a lot, I think, in grief, because there's a sense that if I'm really truthful about how I'm feeling in my grief, I'm going to be judged, right? If I go out just in the supermarket and I'm crying, people are going to wonder, oh, what's wrong with her? And one of the things that I learned very early on is that my grieving process wasn't for anyone else, but it was for me. And so even if I'm in the supermarket and in that moment, there's something came over me and it made me want to cry, I would cry. And I didn't owe anyone an explanation as to what those tears were for. Because if I waited until I got home, it's gone and I can't get that back, you know? And tears are so healing for us. And so I think in our society, we do a thing to grief where we say, all right, get over it really quickly, get back to normal, right? And so we bypass it. Like we live in this hyperdrive society where everything is a drive-through. Oh, let me go up here and drive through and, you know, get what I need and I'm gone, right? But grief is one of those teachers, though, that it doesn't allow you to do the drive-through really fast, right? Because you can drive through and place your order, but you might have a slow server and you find that you're just kind of waiting there for a really long time. So, but go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's interesting right now because there is this like grieving process for all of us that things have really changed. And there is no, let's go back to normal. Like that's gone now. And so what are your thoughts on that with all that you've been through? Like, how do we cope with that?
Yeah, I've, of course, this whole COVID and pandemic, it's interesting because when it first happened in March, I think that's when we had our first shutdown. The first thing I thought, I was like, oh, I've been here before. I was like, this is very familiar to me. And here's what I would say to that is COVID, this pandemic, is teaching us some massive lessons that I think we've tried to put in the back burner. There is no going back to normal, number one, right? And I think the sooner we all have that registered, a lot of the anxiety that we feel will disappear.
Yeah, agreed.
So it's not about going back to normal. It's not about going back to what we used to have, but it's coming into, well, what's the new being created for me and for us collectively, right? And it's actually even giving gratitude to the old way, right? The old way served a purpose up until a time, but it no longer serves a purpose for us now. So I feel we are rebuilding a brand new system, right? On every level, right? And so even on this level of me educating people about death, dying, and grief, it's like we can upgrade how we see death, dying, and grief. We can upgrade how we see ourselves, how we treat other people, how we react. It's like the whole system and foundation is getting an opportunity to be upgraded. And while I know we are not friends of change, right? We human beings, we tend not to like change. And I have this conversation with my daughter all the time. Like whenever, we just moved and she's like, Mom, this is another change. I was like, yeah. I was like, we've had a lot of change in the last 3 years. I was like, but we are actually wired to get through change with success and fruitfulness. And so I think for those of us, for all of us in this pandemic, it's changing the lens that we wear, right? So, it's like I'm wearing these glasses. Sometimes they get really dirty and smudgy and I really can't see as well. And so my perspective might not be as clear and crisp. But when I take them off and, I clean them up a little bit, it's like, oh, wow, I can see that. I can see a little clearer now. And I think a huge part of it for many of us is, what are the old lenses that we've been wearing that has clouded our perspective to actually see? You know, because everything is just perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
It really, really is. It's just perspective. And I think we are in such an amazing, beautiful space to use this pandemic as a way to create further, number one, to change how we see ourselves and to do this inner work, right? But also, how do we see each other, right? I mean, this is one of the big things that are taking place right now. Mask, no mask, I don't care about you, I only care about myself. So it's a human story that's taking place right now. How will we as humanity actually come together during this time, right? Is there going to be, are we going to enter into it, me versus them, right? Or are we actually going to allow this moment where we can collectively count on each other, right? And so there is no going back to normal. Normal has left the station, and she's not coming back.
So true. So true. Oh my gosh. What about holy badass living? I love that. I love that term of phrase. And what does that mean to you? And what is it? Like, how do we tell people about it?
Yeah, so Holy Badass Living, and I'm actually going through a complete rebranding too. So I'm creating a rebranding with Esha Estar, where Holy Badass Living will be under that umbrella. And the books, Wisdom of Death, will be coming out towards the end of December, then Wisdom of Grief. Yes, and so thank you for part of that, right? Because when I spoke to you that one time, he was like, yeah, you got to do this. Your guides are saying it's time. And so I took your advice and I am just running with it, because now more than ever during this time, it's so perfect for this message to come out, right? And it's not about me. These messages came out during, my deep, intense, dark space of being in the grief. And one of the things I wanted to say before I answer your question about Holy Badass Living is that, and this is what I also want people to have a deeper understanding and knowing of, is that when we're going through deep suffering, right? And most of us are afraid of suffering, but there's something mysterious that's also happening during suffering, right? There's something lurking in the underbelly of suffering. And I found this to be true for myself, and I'm sure everyone has a different experience of their own suffering and dark moments. But I found that it was also the most creative time of my life, right? Like I wrote so much, and I was getting so much downloads that came in during that time, and so many different ideas kept coming to me about what I can create. So suffering, we're actually planting seeds, right? And so when you think about how things come to fruition, how things grow, you have a baby, the seed is implanted in darkness. You want an apple tree, you have to plant that seed in the ground where it's dark. So things grow in the dark. And this might be a dark time for humanity, but we are planting seeds, right? And we may not see what those seeds are going to become until the next couple years. But, I want to tell, all of the listeners is that we are planting seeds to be hopeful, to be so hopeful. And so Holy Badass Living is really all about that. It's like, how can we hold these two paths that we're living? We have this humanness that we are, right? We've incarnated into this body to have the experience of being human. But we also have this divine nature that is already our inherited. This is our jewel. This is who we are. So even when we leave this skin and this temple, this body, this part of us is still going to be there. This we never lose, this divineness. And so how can we walk while we're still alive with both of these together, right? It's not, oh, I'm just walking, I'm just a human being. No, you're this also. You're this divine light, this precious divine light. And the whole experience is the holy, right? Which is your divine right, your inherent right, and the badass being human. Because let's be frank, to live this human life, you have to be a badass. You have to be a badass, right? Because with everything that comes with being human, it is not easy being human. Yes, we complicate things to a deep degree when we don't have to, right? Because I have a sneaking suspicion with everything that I've been going through that life is a lot simpler than we actually make it. So we tend to overcomplicate things, but it's how do we show up each and every moment, honoring the divine within us, honoring the badass within us, but to live fully now, to be the fullest embodiment of those two things, to honor the experiences that you're surely going to go through as a human being. And not to be in a rush to bypass it, you know. And you know, and I understand we want the feel good sensations, we want the joy and we want the love. Those things feel really good, but when we have moments of heartbreak and loss and despair and suffering, we don't want to feel those things. But those are the things that actually are here to help us grow and break out of this cocoon of conformity that we've put ourselves in, right? We were not meant to conform, right? We were not meant to be placed into a mold. And it, you know, this morning I received a message actually from my guides, you know, a message that actually came from my husband, and it spoke about that. And so if we can switch gears, switch how we see and approach things, right? I think we can create space for not just the joys and loves in our lives, but also for the griefs, the death, the loss, the suffering in our lives. But we can look at these things as great transformative agents, not as something that's out there to do us harm. These things are not there to do us harm. They're there to lift us up, to lighten, to bring more light into us. But again, it's all perspective, right? So Holy Badass Living is about having the courage, the audacity to step into that space with yourself, to say, yes, I'm in grief, but no, I have not lost my luminosity.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. And granted, I know this is hard for people, right? Because it's not an easy shifting of gears. You know, you talk about shifting gears, but that's exactly what we're all doing and what you're doing, right? This week of this awakening here in November, you know, and I'm so happy that you're doing it because we're bringing light messages exactly to that, is to get people to shift gears, right? Some of us are already on that train, right? We've shifted gears. And it's not that those other people over there, they don't get it, right? They're still moving forward. They might be moving forward a little slower than this other person over, but they're still on the same train, right? Yeah. And the thing about, you know, when we can step in, you can step in, I can step in, we can step into this place where we say to ourselves, no one is getting left behind.
Yeah.
Right? No one is getting left behind. And I absolutely truly believe that. And it doesn't matter what their belief systems are, what they think right, wrong. So that's sort of like this dual consciousness, this old way of seeing things. It's like, no, that person over there is my brother and sister too. And I want to do what I can with whatever gifts I've been given to bring them along. There's an invitation there for them too. And then it's up to them to choose if they want to open that invitation and come along for the party. You know.
That's like,
but
so
yeah,
beautifully said. Oh my God, it so is, because that is what this is about, you know. This whole experience this year is one big invitation.
It is. It's and I see it as that, you know, in one of the books that I've written, I sort of liken this experience, this life experience, as being invited to like a huge feast, and there's a massive banquet table, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're the guest of honor, and you have all of these different guests that have come. It's love, fear, your traumas, your anxieties, your joys. Like, everyone is invited to that table, and everyone gets to partake at the banquet table. No one is left behind. Not one of your emotions are left behind. Not one of any individual is left behind, regardless of who they are, what their religious, socioeconomic background is, their status is. Because at the end of the day, death levels all of this up. It equalizes the playing field, right? And so, again, we have this opportunity in each now moment to keep choosing what river we want to step into. Yeah, because it's always a choice. We're always been given a choice. None of this is actually forced upon us, right? And so, you might look at the pandemic and some people might say, oh, the universe is forcing us to change, right? Yeah. But this is what we've actually signed up for, whether we realize it or not, right? There is no forcing. The only resistance is if we resist the change, but change is inevitable.
Yeah.
Right? It's inevitable. And so we can go quietly, or we can go with some noise. The choice is ours.
I agree. Oh, I love this so much. There's so many great comments too. One of our dear ones, Mary Lydia Ryan, she wrote the music for One Heart, One Earth. I just love her so much. I love that you're talking about this. I have been feeling into all of what you're talking about. You're saying it well. She also said, Esha, again, you say this so well. You have me in beautiful tears. So we love hearing it all. And Heather says, things grow in the dark. I needed to hear that. Just beautiful. So thank you, ladies, for your comments. And if you guys have questions or comments, please share them. So what's next now? Let's talk about your new book, because you do have a book that's going to come out, which I'm so happy about. What that's all about. I want to share with everyone.
Yeah, so it's called Wisdom of Death, and that'll come out with Balboa Press, hopefully the end of December. And so Wisdom of Death is from Death's point. It's Death talking to the readers, right? And so part of it, one of the questions that I had to sit with during my time in grief after I lost my husband is, what is death trying to show me? What is it trying to teach me? And the answer that I kept coming back to is, how am I living? How am I living? And so, and I'll be honest with you, even though I do this work with death, dying, and grief, I'm still afraid, right? It's like, I'm not going to speak to you and to your listeners and say, oh, I have no fear of death. Terrified, absolutely terrified. But what it's done for me on a daily basis, I actually do sit with death, right? I can't ever go back to living the way I used to. It's not part of my frame anymore. But what it does for me, it reorients my day, where I get to have this conversation with myself, and I say, okay, Esha, today is a brand new day. How do you want to be? How do you want to show up? How do you want to act towards other people? So it's this reorientation that happens each and every moment, and I'm choosing actually the life that I want to have, right? There are no shortage of distractions out there. We have a gazillion distractions, everything that's vying for our attention to pull us out of ourselves, right? And what death does, it reminds me, no, come back to you. Come back to yourself, right? And oftentimes I think we forget that. We're so enamored with the glitter over there, so enamored with the huge amount of distraction that we forget that, oh, I still have this to tend to. And as a 2 on the Enneagram, I'm a giver and a pleaser by nature, right? So I'm calling myself out, first of all. And I've had to really do work around that too, energy. And I'm always going to be a giver by nature because it's just who I am. I love love. I love making other people feel better, but not now, not at the expense of my own joy. And I think a lot of times as light workers, we're given so much to other people that we forget, wait a minute, pause, what about me? Right? Because we light workers, we burn out so quickly. Right? We burn out so quickly and we wonder why we're getting sick and why we're having all these issues. Well, have you stopped to take care of yourself? We're so busy taking care of other people that we don't nourish this. And this has to get nourished. And so, the wisdom of death really talks about death is teaching us with these wisdom messages of really how to live. It's like setting a daily intention for yourself, and it's written in bite-sized messages, because who wants to read a book, frankly, on death with huge paragraphs and chapters? I don't, right? Yeah. It's too heavy of a topic. It's too heavy of a topic, and so I created it in a way where, you can take one little line and just sit with it and be in reflection with it and see how that resonates within you. Because I think death, we do meditations, and I do my daily meditations, but death is like one of the greatest and most powerful meditations that you can do with yourself on a daily basis. And it's not meant to be, we've sort of been conditioned to look at death as this very scary thing in our society. Oh no, if I think about it, I'm going to draw it closer to me, right? It's bull. It's absolutely bull. It's, the Buddhists have a death meditation, and it's so powerful. And I do it actually with my clients that I see. They come in and they're going through whatever they're going through. And one of the things that I do with each and every one of them, I take them through a death meditation. I allow them to see themselves as laying in their coffin and they're dead. And it's one of the most powerful things for them to see how they have lived their lives and what the opportunities they have missed, right? But to see themselves, to truly see themselves, and then to have this transformation where they're making that transformation within themselves, it's an awakening. We don't have an enormous amount of infinite time in this body. We just don't, right? It is finite. Right? Again, the human is finite, the divine is infinite, right? But how are we going to spend this finite amount of time while we're here? Are we going to choose to squabble, argue, right? Spend time angry, whatever it may be? How are we going to choose to spend this time? The times that I've worked volunteering in hospice, and the times that I've spent helping other people transition from life to death and on their deathbed. So many of the things that we concern ourselves with, they're not even important at the end, right? When you're in your deathbed, you're not thinking about your affiliation, your political affiliation. You're not, right? You're not thinking about, things that don't matter. What you're wanting is, at the end, love. Who is with me at my side? It's love, because you're afraid. We don't know what's on the other side. There's a mystery to that. But part of what I aim to do with everything that I'm creating is how can we transition with a sense of fearlessness, right? But that also means that we have to be willing to do the work while we're here, to practice dying each and every day. And so even the changing my name from Amanda Brutus Phillips to Esha Estar, I am not having any attachments to who I am, right? It's just a name. But again, where am I holding on to? And what do I need to let go of to create more freedom? In yoga, it's called moksha, right? This liberation. And I find now, after everything that I've gone through, I want to be liberated more and more. I want to be free more and more. And so it's not about having an expectation. It's not about treating myself, oh, I've done this right, I've done this wrong. It's actually breaking away from this dualistic consciousness and moving into the middle way. You know, there's always a middle way or third way, but because we're so enamored with these two ways that has only been shown to us, we don't see the middle way. And so what is the middle way in your life? What's the other path that you could potentially take? So wisdom of death, that's what that's about. Wisdom of grief, honestly, was never intended to be a book, because it has all of the hard emotional grief that I was feeling during that first year of my grief process. And so it's very raw, it's very vulnerable. And it's just, you know, my hope is for anyone that reads it is to give themselves permission to actually connect with all of the feelings that they're going through in grief, you know. Because I think it is hard. People, you know, I had an experience once. This might have been, husband died in August. In October, I had a friend that told me, don't you think that it's time for you to move on? And I thought it was the most insensitive thing, right? And I know it's difficult for people, some people, to be with someone who is in grief, because I think it's a reminder to them, right? Of something that they themselves might not want to confront or to even be with. But each and every individual will have a different grieving process. But if you interrupt a person's grieving process, you're taking away their growth during this time, right? And so we have to give people permission to grieve in the way that is right for them. There is no one right way to grieve, right? And for us to say, you know, we have all of these platitudes, right? Oh, well, you know, it's, you know, it was his time, or, you know, this is what God it. No one wants to hear that when they're in grief. So please don't be insensitive by giving someone platitudes, right? You put yourself in that person's place and just simply think about, maybe the best thing to do is to be still and silent with them. Maybe the best thing to do is to be just to hold them. Sometimes words are not necessary, right? And so wisdom of grief is really about, it's about that. It's about the whole experience that I went through and just sharing it. So those are the two books, and then I'm doing a book called Chapter 2. And I love Chapter 2 because Chapter 2 is like, well, okay, what's next? Right? Because, you know, you're not the same person.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I knew when my husband died, and we were married for 20 years, together for 24. Amanda also died when he died. That part of my life also ended. You know, and I think I had massive anxiety around that, because I'm like, am I able to curse here?
Yeah, you can do it.
I was like, holy shit. I don't know who I am anymore. And it scared the hell out of me. Like, literally, I didn't know who I was anymore. My husband was the primary provider for us financially. And he took care of the bills, he mowed the lawn, and he did all of this stuff, right? And I would wake up with panic attacks in the middle of the night and early in the morning. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I kept saying, I can't do it. It was too much for me. But the moment I got connected to why I was having those panic attacks, you know, it eased up. And I realized that it may take me a while, but I'm going to do this, you know. And I still have anxiety and panic attacks from moments to moments. I do. And I want to be very honest with that, because I'm still in this human body, even though I have a wider knowing of some things. And I like to say I know nothing, right? I keep emptying myself out, going to that place of kenosis. But yeah, but the moment you connect with why am I anxious? What is this anxiety really about? What is it that I'm fearing? Because anxiety is just another form of fear. But I don't know, Lisa, it's a beautiful journey. It's a terrifying journey. It's all of those things wrapped up in one.
It is so beautiful. And you're just you just speak so beautifully. I could listen to you forever. I just really am so happy you're part of this and part of my life. And Heather has a question. I think it's a great one here as we're wrapping up. But she says, many times people are uncomfortable with anyone who is grieving as they don't know what to say. What do you recommend for someone who is wanting to support someone who is in grief? And before you answer that, I just want to drop in my own 2 cents, which is I just went on this like rant on social media and on my newsletter. I'm sorry for everybody, but I really recognize like it's not just in grief. It's everyone's having a hard time, right? And I've just made this observation, like we're all kind of telling each other what to do. We're girlfriends and it's like, oh God, I'm really upset and I'm frustrated. And it's like, oh, it's going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. And, I think you should do this with the job or this with the boyfriend or whatever. And I'm realizing like, it's so unsolicited. Like we're not really asking for the support that we need. And so I love this question from Heather because it's a great question because how do we support each other? Yeah. When someone loses someone, what do you say? What do you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. So thank you, Heather, for that question. And I think you bring up a really great point because I think oftentimes we feel we have to fix people, right? Or give solutions to whatever you have going on that might not be of, where you want to be. And so we say, I think you should do this. But really, at the end of the day, that belongs to that person, right? Of how they're going to choose to show up and how they're going to choose to, find a way to move forward and whatever that forward motion and action is going to be. But in regards to how do you show up with someone in grief, and I've had a lot of friends that I've lost. I've had a couple of friends I've lost due to COVID and otherwise. And simply what you do is just to create that sacred space for them to be, right? Again, I think sometimes words are not needed. I remember vividly one day I was just in a really dark place and I was going down a rabbit hole and my doorbell rung. I wasn't expecting anyone. I go downstairs and I open the door and it's my friend Biggie. And she's like, I don't know why I'm here. I just got this sensation that I needed to come and just give you a hug. And I got to tell you, that was exactly what I needed. I didn't know that I needed it, but it was exactly what I needed. And she brought me a couple of, I think some gifts and might have been some fruits or whatever, but she just really came to give me a hug. And I held on to her and I held on to that hug because it was exactly what I was needing. And it broke that dark space for me that I was going down mentally. And so I would say, listen to your intuition, what shows up within your field as to what you can do for that individual. I think that's first. Second, know that you don't always have to use words, right? So maybe it's sending a card with just a beautiful message. I'm thinking about you. I'm here for you. Cooking for them, right? Last thing I wanted to do was cook when I was going through that period. So I think there are little things that you can do where you don't have to bring up the reminder for that person that they're in grief, right? One of the things that my girls and I actually sort of hated was when people say, I'm so sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. So that became like a broken record. And I would tell them, well, what are you sorry for? It's not your fault, right? So we can replace we're sorry with something else, you know, and I think part of it is just us being bold enough to not feel scared being in the presence of someone who's grieving, because the energy of grief is heavy, you know, it's dense. But can we allow ourselves to still be there and just hold that space with them without the intention of trying to fix anything? You know, I'm just here. Maybe you're just there to have them cry, right? And hold their hand. That's powerful. And that's what will be remembered, right? Because after the first 2 weeks, when people are bringing your meals and, you know, they're checking in on you, after that, that disappears. And then you have this quiet. And that's when the real grief begins for most people, right? When all of the people disappear. And that's when you actually know, well, who are my real friends? Who are the ones that are actually here during the darkest time of my life? Who still wants to show up to this dance? Yeah. So I hope that helps, Heather.
Oh, I think it did. And Vicky also says, Esha, you are a beautiful soul. And I agree. I have just loved every minute of this, and time flies. And but I hope I'm sure you're going to come back, but you definitely need to come back after your book is out. We'll talk more about that. And
absolutely,
this is only the beginning, I think, but we just love you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. And I appreciate it. And I'd love to come back. And at that time, I should have more information on the grief app that I'm trying to create for people. So I'll give you more information about that then. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you guys can find Esha's information on the website. She has her own presenter page, oneheartonearth.net. And we'll be back in 8 minutes with me and Marlena for Tarot Tuesdays. We're going to be doing live tarot readings. It's our favorite thing every month, one of our favorite things. So join us back for that. And don't forget to click subscribe. Don't forget to follow us everywhere. I'm not even quite sure what else to say right now, but I love you so much.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. We'll be back soon.